It's a great privilege to be talking here today, especially with Harry here. I've made public pronouncements for many years on his wonderful music, but never in his presence before. So if you hear cries of nonsense from the floor, you'll know that they're entirely authentic on this occasion. Actually, I had the privilege last year of taking part in a conference in Paris with Berriot's widow, Talia, and I was very struck. She instinctively was able to switch in conversation between talking about Luciano and Berriot. Luciano would make a wonderful espresso in the morning. Berriot first encountered Joyce in 1957, or whenever it was. So I'm going to make that distinction this afternoon. Harry, the man we know and love over there, and Birtwistle, the composer, rather like the Minotaur, half man, half composer. So here we are. My talk has a very different character from David's talk, but I hope the two complement one another, and particularly some of the issues that he started with to do with objectivity and subjectivity I would like to pick up. And I've called my talk Of Shadows and Mirrors, Birtwistle in the New Millennium. Birtwistle's music has always existed in a world of shadows. The tendency towards the melancholic announced itself most explicitly in Melancholia I for solo clarinet, harp, and strings of 1976, taking Dürer's famous engraving of the same name as its starting point and mediated via Günter Grass's essay on that drawing. Birtwistle confronts us in this work with the dark side of utopia, to use Grass's resonant phrase, through the clarinet's repeating, lamenting lines. As I've suggested elsewhere, it's almost as if the composing subject is somehow embodied in and speaks through the lugubrious solo instrument, Birtwistle's own instrument, after all. And in this particular case, there is a personal connection in that the work was written explicitly in memoriam Tony Wright, Birtwistle's promoter at his then publisher Universal Edition. But one might say that a predilection for the humour of the night is evident even in his earliest extant piece, the Ukuing Bird, a sad little song for piano written, so it would seem, when he was 15 or so, and which then extends across all his music. The child is father of the man, to use Wordsworth's phrase. And perhaps the clearest evidence of this melancholic tendency lies in the obsession, and obsession, I think, is the right word here, across his adult life with that most celebrated of melancholics, Orpheus, who actually managed to enter the liminal world of shadows, that is Hades, and return to tell his sad tale endlessly, reliving and lamenting his loss over and over. I remember, he intones continually in The Mask of Orpheus. In the new millennium, Birtwistle has returned twice to Orpheus in works that tellingly stand either side of the Minotaur and lead us to explore the possibility that in the opera, though the mythical narrative is new, its essential subject matter remains unchanged. In 2003-04, he made a number of settings of Rainer Maria Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus in the shape of 26 Orpheus elegies for oboe, harp, and countertenor. And in 2008, he produced the theatrical scena The Corridor, also to a Harsent libretto, which attempts to deal with the familiar themes of loss and lament, but from Eurydice's perspective. So I'd like to pause for a moment or two to look at the elegies. These are not so much about Orpheus as a reflection on Orphic themes in melancholic mode, a looking back at Orpheus, appropriately you might say, in maturity. Like a Baroque aria, each short movement is concerned with just one musical or expressive idea, described by the composer as like postcards. Only a handful of them are actually sung. When the singer does sing, he doesn't play the part of Orpheus, but rather offers a commentary. It's more often the oboe's line that might be understood to represent the voice of Orpheus. In the instrumental elegies, short fragments of Rilke's text are placed after the music to suggest or intensify the mood, in the manner of Debussy's piano preludes. There are occasional enraged outbursts, but for the most part the movements are, as the elegies of the title suggests, songs of mourning and lamentation. Rilke wrote the sonnets to Orpheus at breakneck speed during February 1922, in part as a memorial to the dead 19-year-old daughter of a friend who becomes a kind of Eurydice, and in part a general elegy for the dead youth of the First World War. He seems almost to identify with and speak through Orpheus. Orpheus, the musician, becomes a poet for the new age. Of particular importance to Rilke was what he called the Unsäglichen, the unsayable. This is Rilke in a letter of 1903. Most phenomena are unsayable and have their being in a dimension which no word has ever entered. And works of art are the most unsayable of all. They are mysterious presences whose lives endure alongside our own perishable lives. It's only through human creativity, music in particular, argues Rilke, that we can express the unsayable. Words may fail, but Orpheus's song continues to resound, just as Orpheus continued to sing, even though his head had been separated from his body. Birtwistle's Elegy number 5 from the Orpheus Elegies is one of the simplest and most touching movements, and it has the following excerpt from Rilke appended. It's in German, this is the English translation by Stephen Cohn, and the ticking footsteps of our watches walk beside our individual days. Throughout all these pieces, the harp stands for the lyre, for Orpheus's lyre. The oboe, of course, carries conventional associations of both melancholy and the pastoral reed pipes, the ancient aulos. In this movement, the singer is silent, but there's an additional presence, a metronome ticking away at crotchet equals 84. It's that pulse again. And the score says the metronome should be inside a box so as not to be seen and also to mute it. So in this particular case, Birtwistle's clearly been prompted by the ticking footsteps of the poem. Here is the movement in its entirety. It only lasts a minute. In the wake of the First World War, Rilke explores in his Orpheus poems an antagonism towards the machine and other dehumanizing aspects of modernity. And in this movement, the one we just heard, I hear the incessant, unchanging, non-human ticks of the metronome as threatening, not least because the source and the threat remain hidden. The metronome, in Greek metro and nomos, measure and law, might be understood to represent the absolutely rational law of Apollo. These mechanical sounds impinge upon the human, as can be heard in the harp, heartbeats and all, which remains under the control of the machine, that is, within its pulse frame. The highly constricted pitch material sets an atmosphere of unease. The oboe opposes this with a music that appears entirely irregular. Exclusively in multiples of triplet quavers, its fluid melody never coincides with the metronome's pulse. This might be understood to represent the satiric realm of Dionysus. The conflict between the two is perhaps another version of the musical contest between Apollo and Marsyas, and forms the basis for the movement's sense of melancholy. You may remember that the violent consequences of Apollo's victory in the contest was that Marsyas was flayed alive for his hubris. But the oboe is also here singing the elegiac voice of Orpheus. Here now, one might argue, after Rilke, mourning the losses of modernity. Moving generally stepwise, it adopts the conventional characteristics of the lament. The opening semitonal rising and falling figure of the oboe's melody has become a familiar sign in Birtwistle, the falling semitone as a topic of sighing, weeping, and lamenting, the so-called pianto, which goes back at least as far as the 16th century. This motif and variants on it are signifiers of the melancholic. It's from such simple materials in the Orpheus elegies that Birtwistle builds a landscape of melancholy. Now compare this with the first toccata from the Minotaur. Ariadne has watched the arrival of the boat carrying the innocent sacrificial victims and Theseus to the island. Theseus describes his wishes to Ariadne. Ariadne has other thoughts on her mind, desperate to escape from the island. The innocents prepare to enter the labyrinth, and Theseus sings his first aria. Down into darkness. Now they'll go down into darkness, into the labyrinth. These deaths are a debt that can only be cancelled with a death. My death, or the Minotaur's, or both. His death cry, or mine, hanging in the air. Every night I hear it in my sleep. This then is the realm of cries and dreams, a liminal world of shadows, of the Unsäglichen, of the unsayable. And we hear this music. So we heard ostinatos in pizzicato strings, brass, and so on, a continuum, to use a Birtwistle word, and above that a sustained melodic idea on oboes and so on, a cantus oscillating up and down, a semitone. Once again, from the very simplest of materials is built a melancholic landscape. It's the same situation we encountered in the elegy. Here now, though, the lamenting subject is set against the objective forces of nature rather than the machine. And in the production, those of you that have seen it or will be seeing it again, you may remember that while these toccatas are playing, we have these extraordinary projections of an immense and infinite swelling sea, which it strikes me as being absolutely the most appropriate imagery at this particular moment. Now, the sounds we hear might be Theseus's imagined dreamed voice, but that's to tie it down. More generally, like the entrance to the labyrinth, it's a metaphor for the edge of darkness, the sheer threshold of the night. And from harp and oboe via opera to the symphony orchestra, here's the same dark world at the beginning of The Shadow of Night of 2001. The title of the work, The Shadow of Night, is taken from the Elizabethan poet George Chapman, he of the famous Homer translation. And that rising and falling semitone on the piccolo that we just heard at the end of that excerpt there is, the composer asserts, a quotation of the opening three notes of In Darkness Let Me Dwell of 1610 by that great Elizabethan melancholic John Dowland. And the idea is continued into the companion piece Night's Black Bird of 2004. But whatever its origins, the implications of the idea are, I think, clear. It does more generalized work, again, as a topic of lament. And I'm also struck by the increasing preference for strings in his recent works, the Bogenstrich pieces, the Concerto for Violin and Orchestra, and the string quartet, The Tree of Strings. Strings were entirely absent from so many of Birtwistle's earlier works, not least the vast Masque of Orpheus. Panic of 1996, to put it crudely, is uncivilized and features the direct sounds of blown and hit instruments, in that case sax and drum kit, at least at the front of the stage, unleashing primitive forces that lie below the surface of civilized culture. The sound of strings, on the other hand, mediated by the bow, is the sound of culture, of the subjective, of the reflective. The Tree of Strings was Birtwistle's first major work after the Minotaur in 2007. Its title is taken from the writing of the Scottish Gaelic poet Sorley MacLean from the island of Raasay, where Birtwistle once lived. The subject of a number of MacLean's poems is the 19th century Highland clearances, which cruelly evicted the established population of islands such as Raasay and turned them into empty landscapes. The music of the quartet explores the idea of the island's emptiness from a geographical and temporal distance, if you like, where lost voices are refracted through an imagined memory. The result is once again poignantly melancholic and personal. So what's striking about all these recent works is that the melancholy, long part of Birtwistle's expressive vocabulary, seems now to have taken on a more personal character. Can we talk here of a late style, in the sense in which Adorno spoke of the late style in Beethoven, a style characterized by a backward-looking tendency, by fragmentation, and by an increasing turn inwards, away from the public and the collective? Well, in a very general sense, I think we can, and this is something I propose to explore in the future. We certainly don't have time to do this today. But even in a recent work that seems to look back to the bold juxtaposition of the musical blocks of the 1960s, I'm referring to In Broken Images, completed last year, this too carries a sense of something familiar being fragmented, like the Gabrielli it's based on, being viewed in a shattered mirror, the original, the past even, beyond grasp, much that a modernist like Birtwistle continually strives and fails to be reconnected with the past. In Birtwistle, those glimpses of the past or other worlds can, ironically, be seen most clearly in ritual spaces on the edge of darkness, in dreams on the other side of a mirror. And this is what we encounter at the heart of the Minotaur. The murders of the innocents, The sacrificial dance of the young girl, loud, rhythmic, violent, visceral, animalistic. These have all the obvious characteristics of a collective ritual rooted in that modernist archetype, the rite of spring, echoing the terrible and futile youthful deaths that so shamed the 20th century. The music even becomes ritual as the drummers take to the stage in those scenes of ritual murder. As in Stravinsky, the music on these occasions overwhelms. As listeners, as observers, we have no choice but to submit to it. But unlike Stravinsky, Birtwistle and Harsent also stand back from this. They reflect on the violence, they question it, they make it subjective. So having watched the Kyries feast on the blood of the victim, we then hear the second toccata. This is another portal, a threshold. It's a searing lament, high on the clarinet, melancholic music sounding once again in the realm of the unsayable. At this point, the Minotaur starts to dream, and his first aria begins. Waking, he could only make primitive grunts. Waking, he's a bull who has to satisfy his murderous urges. Now asleep, in his dreams, he's a man and can speak. In dreams, I seem to remember, he sings. He takes on Orphic characteristics. Significantly, he's also in front of a mirror.
The sea breaking on a rock, the rock falling seawards.
Now, such conflicted mythical creatures are familiar territory. Mr. Punch, half man, half puppet. Orpheus, half man, half god. Indeed, literally two different singers representing the two different aspects on the stage. Pan, half man, half goat. King Kong, half man, half ape. Jean Cocteau favoured such creatures too. In his film Orphée, Orpheus has to pass through a mirror in order to enter the underworld. Mirrors are everywhere in La Belle et la Bête, Beauty and the Beast, I am your mirror, Belle. Reflect on me, and I shall reflect for you. The mirrors, then, are another symbol of the liminal, gateways to different worlds, gateways to different aspects of the self. The beast in the Minotaur encounters a version of himself, yet not himself. Dark in the mirror, he sings, myself or something like myself. And this has decidedly Lacanian overtones. David Beard has successfully taken Lacan's theory of the mirror stage in his discussion of the second Mrs. Kong, not just the role of the mirror in that particular work, a singing character, but more generally the relationship between sound and image. Here too, Lacan's essay, The Mirror Stage as Formative of the I Function, offers a helpful interpretive framework. Birtwistle's divided creatures all have childlike aspects, and the Minotaur is no exception. Kong, you might remember, in Russell Hoban's words given to the mirror in the second Mrs. Kong, was the wild and wordless, lost and lonely child of all the world, an account which might well also apply to the Minotaur. For Lacan, the mirror stage precedes the acquisition of language, as the infant recognizes itself and grapples with the distinction between self and other. The function of the mirror stage, he writes, is to establish a relationship between an organism and its reality. The specular image seems to be the threshold of the visible world. In the scenes where the Minotaur sings, we see and hear him on this threshold between what Lacan calls the imaginary and symbolic orders, that is, crudely between image and language, struggling to find his identity, struggling, ultimately unsuccessfully, with a desire to be whole. Like Orpheus, the Minotaur is alienated from himself. He stands as a figure of the modern world on the dark side of utopia. His failure is tragic, its symptom is melancholy. And for me, there seems again to be something decidedly personal, subjective in this, in keeping with the emergence of the subjective in millennial Birtwistle. Just as Rilke seemed to identify with and speak through Orpheus, so here Birtwistle seems almost to identify with the Minotaur. The dyslexic child, the man of relatively few words, can only truly speak through music and image. Perhaps this is then Lacan's third order of the real. To quote Lacan again, the real lacking any possible mediation, the ultimate real, the essential object which is not an object any longer, but this something faced with which all words cease and all categories fail, the object of anxiety par excellence. This is the Minotaur's world and Birtwistle's world of shadows and mirrors, and the source of his powerful melancholy. Thank you very much.